So, you'll often hear capitalists talk about how capitalism lifted millions of people out of poverty, but actually, in reality, capitalism sent billions of people into poverty. And the greatest example of that is the Democratic Republic of the Congo. But it's worth talking about the fact that everyone in the world lives somewhere on the capitalist pyramid. You've got the 1% at the tip, they're the billionaires, and they own everything. They own the resources, they make all the laws, they control the military, they get all the riches and the wealth of the world. Then you've got like the middle of the pyramid, which is where most of us live. We work paycheck to paycheck and we have to spend our lives spending all that money on mindless consumerism and subscriptions and debt and mortgages and everything, the infinite debt trap. But even we still have it a million times better than all of the people that live at the bottom of the pyramid. And this is where the vast majority of the world actually lives. And the story for most of the world is colonial and capitalist exploitation. And of course, the two can't be separated. Capitalism needs colonialism so it can extract cheap resources to maximize profits. And the only reason colonialism happens is because capitalists are funding it. So the two go hand in hand. And again, the greatest example of that, possibly of all time, is the Congo. But let's go back to the start of this story, shall we? So, before the Berlin Conference in 1884, the region of the Congo Basin, was actually three kingdoms: the Congo, the Luba, and the Lunda. And all of them were very advanced. This is something that was erased by colonial history. They had advanced trade, they had advanced political and government systems. They even had a thriving metallurgy industry where they utilized all the copper, which will soon be exploited. But this world will come to a crashing end in the Berlin Conference. The European colonial powers carve up all of Africa, the scramble for Africa, and Congo, unfortunately, possibly gets the worst of all when it is given to Belgium and it becomes the personal colony of one of the most evil tyrants in human history, Leopold II. And he will turn what is now called the Congo Free State into a capitalist hellscape. It is full of privatized industries and companies that commit genocidal violence to maximize money. And at this period of time and in this part of the world, when we're talking about money, we're talking about rubber. It is the biggest export in the world at this point, and nearly 20 million Congolese people will be killed for it. And the reason they're being killed is because in order to get these rubber plantations to maximize production, maximize profit, they need people to work around the clock. But you can't make people do that by incentives alone. So you have to basically torture them, cut off their hands if they don't produce enough of their rubber quota, or even kidnap their wives and children and send their hands and feet back to the workers to remind them of how hard they should be working. This is the greatest example of just how cruel colonialism can be. It is so bad that even the other colonial powers are starting to go, Belgium, what are you doing? This is insane. But that won't be the reason they stop doing it. Again, this is still a capitalist enterprise, and by 1908, the rubber industry will just start to die off. There's rubber being grown everywhere now. They're growing it in Nigeria, they're growing it heaps of it in Vietnam and in Malaysia and in Indonesia. So the actual trade value of rubber reduces, and so the need to do this level of violence decreases as well. But the horrors for Congo aren't going to end here, because they also know that Congo is full of minerals. Copper will become the next big thing that everyone starts to exploit. But then something comes to interrupt this pattern, which is of course World War II, and Belgium will not do well in World War II. They will be occupied by Nazi Europe, and its few colonies will end up falling into the hands, de facto anyway, of the United States and Britain. Belgium still technically owned them, but the people running the show are the Americans and the Brits, and they will start ramping up the exploitation even more. But of course, because it's World War II, self-determination's a real thing now, and they can't just go around taking colonies and saying, this belongs to me. They have to do neo-colonialism and make it look like these countries are actually free. And they allow elections to happen in the Congo so long as their preferred candidate wins. But in a shocking twist in history, their candidate doesn't win. An awesome man named Patrice Lumumba wins, and he is massively and very vocally anti-colonial. He will become so anti-colonial and demand real, true independence and freedom for the Congo that the CIA and Belgium will eventually torture, murder, and dissolve his body in acid to get rid of this man, and then they will replace him with one of their puppets. This will lead to a rebellion called the Simba Rebellion, which will be a Marxist rebellion full of socialists looking to, again, push forward Lumumba's dream. Che Guevara will show up at one point helping to support this, but eventually it's crushed by the CIA and Belgium mercenaries. This really should have been a clue to the rest of the world of just how far the United States will go to uphold capitalism at all costs. Millions will die in this conflict. And then they will install their new puppet, which is Mobutu, and this will usher in an era known as Mobutu's kleptocracy, which will go all the way up until 1997. He will rename the country Zaire, and it will just be an absolute free-for-all for any capitalist endeavors that want to go in and just pillage this country for everything it can. The IMF, the International Monetary Fund, will also show up and say, hey Zaire, you now owe the US tons of money because look how much support we sent you with all these mercenaries and whatnot. Yes, we've devastated your country and killed millions, but aren't you grateful for that? So you're going to pay us back, and the only way you're going to pay that back is basically cutting all of the health funding, all the education funding, and just let us take all of your resources essentially for free. This will eventually lead to another rebellion, which would of course also be crushed by the CIA. But this time, they won't just do it themselves. Americans are thinking it's not good if we're just constantly showing up, destroying these basically legitimate governments and people trying to be free. So what if we do something clever and start what is basically the first real proxy war? And instead of the US going in, they get their puppets, which is Museveni in Uganda and Kagame in Rwanda, to do it for them. They can go in and send their armies into the Congo, take whatever you want, just make sure that all of the resources end up in corporate hands. And this will lead all the way up to the modern day when, unfortunately, some poor man discovered lithium in Congo, and I bet his heart and stomach sunk when he found that, because yes, he might have made some personal riches off it, but he also knows he's found yet another commodity, another rare resource that all these colonial powers and capitalist countries are going to come and destroy the Congo to take. And of course they do. And since then they've also found coltan, cobalt, again, lithium, there's heaps of copper still there, there's gold. Every precious resource is in the Congo. It's one of the richest places in the entire world, and that is why it can never know peace and never know liberation so long as capitalism and imperialism exist. To give you an idea of just how much money is here, since Apple started going there and setting up mines, they've extracted $24 trillion from the Congo. That is money that belongs to the Congolese people, but now a single US corporation has taken. So all the suffering in the Congo is directly caused by capitalism. Capitalism hasn't lifted anyone out of poverty in the Congo. It has sent everyone into endless despair and horror. And the people desperately need to free themselves from this awful system. So perhaps I'll round it off by quoting Patrice Lumumba himself. He once said, "No brutality has ever forced me to ask for grace, because I prefer to die with my head high than live in submission." And I hope he speaks for all the Congolese people, and I hope they get their freedom very, very soon. This is a very, very quick version of the podcast I've just made on the Triplo podcast. So if you want to hear the long version of this story, which goes for more than 40 minutes, go check that out. Hopefully this has given you something to think about.